Okay, so I'm back. I had to take another break there because looks like the video was only recording for a short time, about four and a half minutes before it cut me off. So in the middle of our discussion about habeas corpus, or at least my rant or long-winded speech on it, I got cut off anyway. So let's continue with that. So we're talking about Sanburg's a Lincoln preface, and in a Lincoln preface, he introduces Lincoln in both a poetic way. He criticizes him on one hand while celebrating him on the other, showing that he's a complex individual, that he was a leader, and with every strong leader you have controversy. He was obviously hated in the South and despised upon his election. In 1861, people immediately said, "That's it. We don't stand this. We can't stand this Lincoln guy." Of course, the Northerners were a little bit more accepting of him, and while he was not always a staunch abolitionist, that is, someone who was 100% against slavery, he was at least more against it than for it than most in his time. And he sometimes criticized, he wanted to keep the Union together more than eliminate slavery. Well, if you're the commander-in-chief, you do want to keep your country together. So yeah, we could criticize him on not wanting to sacrifice his whole country to eliminate slavery. He was, of course, making concessions there at first, but eventually he comes around. He meets Harriet Beecher Stowe. He meets Phyllis Wheatley. He's impressed by them, and after reading their works, and of course, let me go back. Phyllis Wheatley, strike that. That was George Washington. Strike the Phyllis Wheatley remark. Harriet Beecher Stowe. Uncle Tom's Cabin was an important book at the time, but nonetheless, he ends up coming around and being a strong abolitionist and believing in the cause wholeheartedly. And of course, we see that in the Emancipation Proclamation. But looking at this idea that Sanburg mentions, the suspension of habeas corpus. The reason he calls him a despot there is that it's against the Constitution. But if you put it in context, and I think this is why Sanburg says there's kind of two sides to the story. The writ of habeas corpus basically says you have to have proof to put people in prison. You have to have some sort of trial by jury to keep them behind bars. Otherwise, they should be free men. It's to protect the state from locking people up without reason. It goes all the way back to the Magna Carta in 1215 at Runnymede. But the important thing to remember is that while he suspends this with William Seward as the Secretary of State at the time, it is done again when we see Ulysses S. Grant suspend habeas corpus in 9 counties and in South Carolina. We see it again during World War II and the aftermath, when unlawful combatants are picked up when there's a fear of Japanese attack on U.S. soil. So while it's not always a good thing, this notion that he was a terrible guy for suspending habeas corpus is it was a wartime, so you have to put it in that context. All right, so moving on from there, you then read Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech, and in it, of course, he reverberates, and echoes and the chorus of Thomas Jefferson, and saying, and he reminds the United States that they need to live out the true meaning of its creed, that is, the Constitution. This nation to live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed with inalienable rights. Now, of course, he's saying at that point, now it's finally come. The Emancipation Proclamation may have, quote, freed the slaves, but it didn't free the individual African-American individuals from the economic conditions which were tantamount or equal to slavery. It didn't get them out of the slums and the ghettos and economic conditions that they were in because of an unequal society, both in transportation laws to lunch counters to drinking fountains. And until those things were overturned, as King pointed out, in a very passionate and beautiful way, people were going to continue to be treated unequally, and echoing the "We shall overcome" and echoing that voice for the American people, he ended up being just as important to the, as far as you think of Lincoln as putting forth Emancipation Proclamation, the actual act of creating freedom for that population was pushed through by later by legislators after Martin Luther King. So that's an important period. Then you read Bono's poem, song lyrics for "Pride in the Name of Love," and I attached a video from what's his name, England, playing the piano and doing that same rendition, so you could see listen to the song and see the video of Martin Luther King. Just a good poem. One man named One Man Come on a Barbed Wire Fence. The whole idea that he's suffering for his people. And so reread that. It's a poem basically celebrating, or a song celebrating, Martin Luther King's achievements, and of course commemorating in his death as both a horrible, solemn event, but also as a way to remember him as what a huge contribution he made to the country. Okay, where else were we here? Then we read the poem "Slam Dunk and Hook" by the poet. Let me pull up his name. I always butcher his name. Yosef Kumanyaka. It was the "Slam Dunk and Hook," and here's a picture of that gentleman. Let me see if I can bring that up for you. You can see it in any way, shape, or form. That's Yosef, and he was the one that he writes that beautiful poem about basketball, fast breaks, layups with Mercury's insignia on our sneakers. We outmaneuvered to footwork of bad angels, nothing but a hot swish of strings like silk, 10 feet out in the roundhouse labyrinth of our bodies. Created, we could almost last forever, poised in midair like storybook sea monsters. A high note hung there, a long second, off the rim. We'd corkscrew up and dunk balls that exploded, the skull cap of hope and good intention, lanky, all hands and feet, sprung rhythm. We were metaphysical when girls cheered on the sidelines, tangled up in a falling. Muscles were a bright motor double flashing to the metal hoop nailed to our oak. When Sonny Boy's mama died, he played non-stop all day, so hard our backboards splintered. Glistening with set, we rolled the ball off our fingertips. Trouble was, there slapping in black jaw against the open palm, dribble drive to the inside, a glide like a sparrowhawk, layups, fast breaks. We had moves we didn't know we had. Our bodies spun on swivels of bone and faith through the lyric slipknot of joy, and we knew we were beautiful and dangerous. So that's his poem, "Slam Dunk and Hook," just one of the 3 that you were asked to read there. And what I thought was interesting about the collection of poems is you have 2 about sports and kind of the being in the moment of and losing yourself to the sport, the majesty of the sport, but also just basically feeling almost like you're not of this world because you're so caught up in and engaged in the physical activity of the sport. That, of course, is awesome. But then equally interesting is the Shoulders poem, which I'm going to take a break here and then get back to that, see if I can pull that one up for you guys and gals and students all around.